We'd like to welcome each and every individual to Voices of Integrity podcast. And today we're doing a very special podcast with a new friend of mine. And he's an interesting person. The first conversation he and I had, it went for 2 hours. I think it could have gone a lot longer than that, actually. We covered so many different topics. It was crazy. Like all over the board. Like everything. We kept going from one to another. It was a lot of fun. Fritz, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Maybe, growing up a little bit, and maybe kind of your early years, and then now you're a business guy, family, just give us kind of an overview or a starting point of who you are.
Yes, I can. I grew up here in northern Indiana in LaGrange County. We're an old order Amish church members, and my dad was a part-time farmer. Mostly we raised livestock, and so I always tell people I grew up on a hog farm, fixing things that the hogs ruined. Um, so that's a full-time job for anybody that grew up on a hog farm. Nowadays they have confined feeding, and they have real good systems, real good buildings to raise hog and bring pork to the table. But back then, you did it in whatever building you had available and with whatever fences you had available, and it was a full time job to fix fences, mend fences, do chores, whatever. And I was the youngest of six children. I loved to build things. I loved to find out how things worked and why they worked the way they did. So, with me being Amish and only going to the school for eighth grade and starting a year earlier than I was really supposed to, I was out of school. I had just turned 14 years old and I had just graduated from the eighth grade. And I had too much time on my hands, so I would end up dismantling or pulling apart a lot of like the old Briggs and Stratton engines that we had around the farm there. We'd have them in this corner, that corner, and I'd pull them apart, try to figure out what made them work, why they worked, and things like that. Uh, my dad noticed that I had too much time on my hands and that I liked to tear things apart and rebuild them. So even though he couldn't afford it, and I didn't realize this, or I didn't really think about it until years later, he couldn't afford it. We had a very low income. I remember the one year my dad was saying, "You know what, Fritz, we made $11,000 this year." At the time, it really didn't mean anything, but that was even back then. That wasn't a whole lot to raise a family on, is to have a
Right.
yearly income of $11,000. So, but anyway, he made payments on. It's called the Foley Belzaw uh, Home Study Course for Small Engines, and he subscribed to that for me, and he made payments for 2 years on that
Uh,
uh, home study course so that I could have a bit of an education. And I ended up, fixing engines and doing work for the neighbors just because I loved doing it. And I made enough money to pay for a couple of tools and everything. And then I started my Rumspringer years, and I got away from that. Um,
so
I'd actually bought it.
for our listeners, Fritz, who might not be familiar with Amish, what are the Roomspringer years?
The Rumspringer years are kind of a coming of age for the Amish. I think it's got its roots in the Catholic church system, which is where the Anabaptist people come from. I think if you're of Spanish descent or Mexican descent, your coming of age years are 15. In Amish, when you turn 16, there's kind of a coming of age period where a lot of families will let the children start to explore the outer world. Maybe wear some non-Amish clothes, um, stay out later. For a lot of kids, they can start to date. Maybe go out with kids their own age, hang out with kids their own age. It's basically just a coming of age, right? That's what I call it. You're transitioning from that childhood into adulthood, and it's a tough period. And um, there's the Amish get criticized for it a lot. Um, some people say, well, they just turn their kids loose. Well, sometimes it probably looks like that from the outside in, and but it's really not that. You know, being Amish is an adult decision. It's a decision that we make as adults, and it's a the decision that would be very difficult to ask of a child. So before we decide to make that commitment, that church commitment, and be a part of the church or be a member of the church, we oftentimes go through this what they call rumspringen, which just translates into running around. Um, I'm not sure why we call it that, but no, because that's kind of what the kids do. Maybe they experience or experiment with some of the outer world. Like for me, it was non-Amish clothes, going to functions on Saturday nights, Friday nights, being involved in sports. I started playing sports a lot, took up a lot of my time. After I was 18 and could sign my own driver's license, I signed my own driver's license, got a driver's license, drove a car for 6 years up until I was 24 years old before I came back, joined the Amish church, sold my car, put my English clothes away, and said, you know what? I've experienced this non-Amish lifestyle. I've experimented with it. I had a TV. I lived in a house with electricity, and as I grew into a young adult, I started to realize that, hey, this isn't what I want. I want to go back to what I did have, what I grew up with. So that's kind of the Rumspring
Got it.
in a nutshell.
Thank you.
That's a
That's
short
helpful.
version of it.
Yeah.
But
And
so
then
yeah,
what
that
did
was
you
good.
do? You know, what are some of your childhood memories? I think your dad went ahead and approached a neighbor or an uncle and offered up some help or something from you. That's a cool story.
Well, what happened is after the Rumspringa years, when I sold my car and quit participating in all the city leagues sports that I was involved in, uh, so I was kind of homebound. I still had my full time job, but I was kind of homebound without having a car. And my dad encouraged me to go down to the neighbors. He had a farm machinery repair place. Did some welding, did some painting, did some sandblasting, and he repaired horse-drawn farm equipment. And he encouraged me to go down there and just volunteer my time. And I said, well, why would I do that? I mean, the guy hasn't asked me to, not necessarily looking for a job. I said, just go down there and volunteer. And if he can't pay you, don't worry about it. The experience is worth more than anything he'll pay you. But he did. I can't remember if he actually paid me or not, but I did. And I went down. I told him, hey, I need something to do after work because I'm home from work. I had a real good job. I worked from 6 a.m. till 12 p.m. I made $1,400 a week doing that. Living at home, but without TV, without sports, without a car, I had nothing to do, and I needed to fill up my days. So I'd go down there and help this guy, and he put me to work sandblasting and painting farm equipment. And that progressed into him encouraging me to do that on my own. After I got married, that's what I did. Actually, I started before I got married. I had my own place, and I had a three-car garage there that I wanted to use for something. So, oh, those things kind of one thing led to another, and got me started in the business that I'm in today. I guess. I mean, and
What is that business, Fritz?
we are a steel and aluminum fabrication business. We supply the RV industry here in northern Indiana. Most of the RVs in the world are built here in Elkhart County and LaGrange County, Indiana, and we're right in the middle of that. And that's what we do. We build steel and aluminum components for the RV industry. We have roughly 135, maybe 100, maybe a little more, maybe 140 employees. We we've always had a we've always been very busy. We've had a nice growth spurt from 2009 all the way up to 2022. We grew at around 35% per year,
Wow.
year after year. So we were always growing, always expanding. And it was a wonderful opportunity for me to just, since I loved equipment, loved figuring out how the things work, I got to, well, I still get to purchase and own very unique equipment, very fun metalworking equipment, and I get to work with very highly talented employees that work here. So I'm probably one of the luckiest guys in the world. Um, I do exactly what I love doing as far as the work out in the shop, but I also love numbers. I've always loved numbers. The good Lord gave me a mind that schoolwork was a breeze for me, and that's not the case for everybody, but for me it was. And I love to make numbers work. I love the concept of business. I love everything about business. I love the work in the office. I love the work in the shop. I love to get dirty. I love to to make a profit. I enjoy banking, and consequently, I've been invited to sit on a bank board. So I've been a bank board member for the last 7 years now. So learning all about the banking industry. So, been very fortunate in my career, especially. I think one of the most unfortunate is the opportunity to work with such highly talented people and people of integrity, people of that have really uh, how should I say it? Been a pleasure to be around. I mean, I don't regret going to work. I sometimes feel bad because on Sunday afternoons I can feel myself to start percolate a little bit, and I'm ready to go to work. I love my work family. I love my home family too, but I love going to work. I love being at work, and not a lot of people you hear them complain about work. I've never really experienced that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of young adults that listen to the various podcasts, and a lot of them want to have their own companies. Like they want to start their own companies. They want to own their own companies. They want to be their own boss. Fritz, what advice would you give to somebody like that?
Well, I would encourage them to try to find something that they really love to do, but because for many years that's the only reward you'll get. If you want to grow your company, you'll be pouring all the profits back into the company, and you'll be living like a pauper for quite a few years. And for
I'm
many
going to
people, it's
pause. I'm
longer.
going to pause Fritz right there. I don't know what it is, when they talk about, like my wife and I, we were married when she was 19 and I was 20, and they say love is blind until you get married. Then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, owning your own company is just like that. And so you probably didn't hear it, but Fritz said, even if your business is successful, you're going to be pouring like all the money back into your business. So you're going to be living like a pauper. And um, so if you go ahead, and I've worked with entrepreneurs all over the world in all different industries. And 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 I think a lot of times people love the concept of owning their own company, but they don't realize how hard you work, how much sacrifice that you have to have, and the risks that are associated with it. Um, and and so again, I want to pause and put a bookmark there. Like if you're looking at making tons of money and have lots of freedom to do everything you want to do, probably starting your own company is not the way to go. It's hard work. It really is. Sorry to interrupt, Fritz. I just want to make sure the listeners were aware of what you were saying because it is hard.
You're very right, Mark. I mean, I appreciate you stepping in because it's harder than people think it is. And but the thing of it is, if that's where you find your satisfaction is in that hard work, then it's for you. Because if you're going to find your satisfaction in and taking time off and spending the fruits of your labor, you're not going to have a whole lot of satisfaction in the beginning unless you're very, very unique. But for the most people, if they don't get the satisfaction of, pouring their heart into something and watching it grow and knowing it's growing, and their family's involved in it, and like my wife once, I mean, when for so many years, you wonder, are you on the right track? Are
Right.
we getting anywhere? And for 3 days a week, you're thinking, man, I'm going to sell this. And for 4 days a
Right.
week, you're thinking, no, we'll just hang on to it. So there's a very fine line between bailing out and keeping going. And fortunately for me, my wife was there every step of the way. She was okay with the sacrifices. She didn't want to be poor and she didn't want to struggle all the time, but she was okay with it. She thought, you know what? That's my husband. That's his dream. That's what. And I didn't know this until years later. She told me, Fritz, I just thought we were always going to be living from one paycheck to the next. And if there sometimes there wasn't even a paycheck there. It was just there was no money for a paycheck. But I
Well, it's
said, really?
interest. It's interesting, right? It's interesting because in the early years, when we just started having children and stuff, I didn't find this out until years later too, that my wife was really struggling, and she talked to her parents, and her parents gave her great advice. And she said, "Mark is working a lot of hours. Man, it's hard." And her mom said, "Suck it up, Buttercup. Like he's not out partying. He's not." He's trying to build something for the future. And her dad gave her equally good advice and said, "Honey, you got to talk to Mark and tell him. You got to share the feelings so you're in this thing together." And in the 33 plus years we've owned our own company, I think there's three times where she said, just exasperated. She's just it's so hard. And she says, "Can't you just go get a real job?" And I said,
Mm-hmm.
"Honey, I can, but you know me, sweetheart. And that is going to be, you know, I mean, whether I own a company or work for a company, I treat it like I own a company. And so, I'm going to have one customer rather than a whole bunch of customers. If I'm working for somebody else, and they'll probably move us around the country and put me on the road, and I'll be training and doing a bunch of stuff. So it's not easy, but I'm home every night, and I get to travel when I do travel with the kids, and I do get to decide, where we're at, when we're at. Don't miss any of the kids stuff. And so you're right. If you're married, it's so important. Your spouse is so important to that success, because man, is it hard.
I That's very much. And even if it's just if the spouse, there's days when it's mid morning, it's 8 o'clock, and I've got problems that are just everything seems to be coming at you, and you can't really make any headways. You can't make any decisions. You can't get anywhere. And even just if I could just, my work is close to my house, so I could walk over to the house, tramp into that house, and just tell my wife, what was going on, and just the part about verbalizing this out loud to my wife would help me to decipher, okay, here's the path forward, and then after I would complain to her about what was going on, it's like, wait a minute, that ain't even that bad. Because once you put it into into oral verbalizing, talking about it, it's like, okay, yeah, that's not that hard to figure out. And maybe it was just the way she'd look at me and just kind of listen. And fortunately, she would, take time and look at me and hear what I'm saying, and then be smart enough to not even say much, just listen to me. And then by the time I was done telling her about my problems, I had them figured out and I knew what I was going to
Right.
do next. So
Or
another
they
great
might,
thing about a spouse in business.
right. Or they might go ahead and laugh and say, "Hey, how about if I go solve your problems, you stay with the kids?" And you're like, "My
Yep.
problems aren't that hard."
Yep. Or she might say, you know what? That faucet is still dripping, and it's been dripping for the last 24 months already. Could you just work on that faucet? And you're like, oh, Yeah, you're right. But anyway,
Right.
um, but no, a spouse is very important because I think that journey of owning your own business, that lifestyle of owning your own business and being an entrepreneur and building a business, it's usually the journey is usually a lot longer than you think it's going to be when you start, and
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of people make that mistake. Uh,
Yeah.
but it's okay because the journey's if you enjoy the journey, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a long
Right.
journey.
Right.
Keep
Well, I
enjoying it.
remember once I was doing a podcast with Tom Coons, who's most recent past president of Century 21. And he and I were doing a podcast and out of nowhere. I mean, I don't even remember what we were talking about. This was a number of years ago. And he went ahead and said, I hope, and there were a whole bunch of people on that podcast. And he said, I hope we all realize that the sacrifice, and he said we don't, but I hope we all recognize that everything that Mark's sharing with us today about business and whatever the topic was, he said, there's a price that's been paid. And Rosanna, Mark's wife, and his kids, they've made a tremendous sacrifice for Mark to acquire, what he has that he's sharing with us. And I just broke down in tears right there on the podcast. I'm like he knew, like a lot of times I think the owner, they get a lot of recognition and a lot, people go ahead and whatever. But a lot of times I think the spouse and the kids, there's a sacrifice that they pay, and not a bad one. I mean, my kids got to travel all around the world with me, got to go ahead and start, getting up on stage and speaking and doing all kinds of stuff. It's a different, like you say, it's a lifestyle, it's a way of life. It's very, very different to be a wife or a spouse or children of an entrepreneur. Real quick in closing, I want to have you back on again, Fritz, on another one on a podcast for Clean Windows. It's a project that it's my 18th book that I'm co-authoring with Elaine Yoder, and it's learning to see things we can't see. And in
Okay.
today's society, like 97% of all businesses will fail within the first 7 years. So your statistical probability of success in business, I mean, it's just not high. And so I think in business, um, you're forced to see things that you don't want to see. And if you don't see those things, you go out of business. Do you have any suggestions, Fritz, on how do you help people to see things that they don't want to see?
Well, in business, I guess if we're talking in the business aspect of things, oftentimes people don't want to see if that their BOM and their overhead cost and their cost of doing business exceeds what the marketplace will pay for their services. So, how do you see that early enough to make adjustments and adjust the sales? Um,
What about just
you
in
have to.
personal life? Like what about just in life? Like somebody who doesn't own a company, a child or a young adult. Like sometimes I just think, how come people aren't seeing that the path they're on is not a good path? It's going to end up in a bad, bad place. How do you help people see that, Fritz?
Uh, I think it's you can only do so much. I think you help people see that by helping them by giving them good real world information and biblical information. Um, you're almost coming to a point where one of my devotions this morning, as a sheep will know his shepherd's voice. And why do they know his voice? Is because the shepherd spends time with him. And how do we see those things that we can't see? How do we see that we're on the wrong path? I think that we have to spend time researching things. We have to spend time looking at the hard data. We have to spend time looking at our peers. We have to spend time communicating with our peers. We have to listen to people that have been there, done that. But at the same time, we also have to look to our creator, the man of, we have to look to God and to see, to try to decipher, is this a path that you want me to pursue, God? Is this what you're after? And how do we do that? We have to spend a certain amount of our time reading the Bible and clearing our minds of media, not just social media. Sometimes we have to just sit and think. I'm sorry, I should have started here. Sometimes it's good to just sit and think. Don't read anything, don't listen to anything, don't put earbuds in, don't look at anything. Just sit and empty that mind and let your conscience, or let God speak to you. He's not he doesn't interrupt a whole lot. You have to let him speak, and he will. And sometimes I think if we sit and think, and if we ponder things that we have taken the time to do a little bit of research on, I think he will tell us if we're on the right path or not. I really truly believe that. I might get maybe a lot of people don't believe that, but I think meditation, maybe that's what the world will call it, is meditation, but I call it just sitting and thinking and letting the Lord speak to you. Sometimes
Well, I
I think
know
he will
one
let you.
businessman that would agree with you, Henry Ford, Senior. He called it
Okay.
ruminate. He would say he'd ruminate on things like it's like he's thinking, he's ruminating, he's kind of going through things and kind of struggling through things in a good way and letting it happen how it happens. Fritz, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Look forward to having you on in another podcast as well, to share, not only the business but marriage, tips on marriage and kids and in the spiritual world and just, interactions and relationships, all of those types of things. Is going to be a fun journey. Thanks so much. If you're listening to the rebroadcast of this, you have any questions, definitely share this with other people. If you have any questions, connect with the individual who invited you to participate in today's session, or you can call toll free 888-230-2300 outside the US 630-393-9909. And always remember, we can accomplish so much more together than we ever could on our own. God bless and have an amazing day. Bye-bye.